good evening in India. It's 7:30 p.m. It's 10 a.m. in New York and Toronto. Welcome to Expressions, the platform where we discuss issues that matter. Our special guest today is Professor Arvind Panagariya, former chief of the Niti Aayog, an esteemed professor and author of many books and papers. Professor Panagariya, welcome. Along with me is Prabhu Chawla, editorial director of Indian Express, veteran columnist on matters of politics and economics. Professor Panagariya, I was just looking at the number of books that you have written, and the one common feature I see is your optimism about India. And I was struck by the titles. India, the emerging giant, India Unlimited, New India. I think there was one I remember which also was called India's Tryst with Destiny.
Yes.
As we sort of face the pandemic and obviously you're now a non-partisan professor in New York and Columbia University. So what's your candid view of which title of the books, of the many books that you've written, would sort of suit the context today?
To me, the context doesn't really matter, which is a very temporary one. The onslaught of COVID, may color somebody else's vision, not mine, I should say, upfront. I think the long-term prospects for India, I see as very positive. So you can take my latest one, New India or India Unlimited, as my answer to your specific question. But to be sure that COVID has brought the growth rate down to negative of almost 24% for the particular quarter for which the latest data have been released. But I think, that is in line with what has happened elsewhere. And if you also look at which parts of the GDP, meaning which components, which sectors have shrunken more and which have not, you can see the footprint or fingerprints or whatever of COVID all over. So that too, I don't read that as saying very much of anything about the long-term prospects of the country.
Because Dr. Panagariya is saying that what happened elsewhere. I'm sure he's not saying that it's God's act, which we have been saying here. But elsewhere, countries, the economies are not growing at 4% earlier. I don't think any of the developed countries.
Yeah, okay. So then we go back to, so you want to go back to the pre-COVID.
Pre-COVID,
you want to go back
no economy which you are operating, even the economy which you are living in, never grown by 4% in many years. So when you say India is still growing in quarter 4%, you have to keep that perspective in mind. I'll talk about it a little later. Let Shankar continue. Just keep that in mind.
No, we can come back to that. There are lots of issues around this, but I certainly don't see this negative of 24% as anything different from what has happened elsewhere. You look at Spain, you look at UK, Italy, similar numbers, not very different. There's some variation, but not dramatically different. And also when you look at the sectors in India which have done very poorly and which have done kind of okay, it is a footprint of COVID. What you see is COVID here.
But I'll step back to on the economy in a minute, Professor. I just wanted your take from across the Atlantic on how do you see India having managed the pandemic, and then we will come to the economic part of it. Do you see, because you are where it was like called the epicenter at one time, and now India is approaching 5 million mark, 75,000 deaths. Fortunately, the fatality rate is low. But do you, as somebody who understands statistics, as somebody who understands, who has had experience in how New York managed it, how the US has managed it, and the rest of the world, how do you see India has managed?
In the end, this is going to be judged by what the numbers turn out to be eventually and all. But I think we did move fast. I would actually backtrack a little bit. I think earlier on, we could have been a lot better prepared. By which what I mean is that, we had the experience of 2009-10 of H1N1. and whereas, you know, the East Asian countries, which had the experiences of the, you know, SARS-1 or another of these pandemics, they had beefed up their defenses actually, and countries like Taiwan, South Korea, even Vietnam, they were prepared, I think. We also had lost actually a few thousand lives in H1N1. But unfortunately, you know, we did not prepare ourselves for the next one. So when it began to show up in January, February, we had no masks, we had no PPEs, so basic preparedness was lacking. So I would say that preparedness was a bit of a problem. We should have been better prepared in view of the fact that some of the other countries with past experience had done so. Now, I think, and I've written it in various outlets, that around March, when the Prime Minister declared the strict lockdown, I was very much for it, and I think that was the right decision at the time. In hindsight, we can vary and so forth, you know, but at the time, the question one was asking was that with so few infections at that stage, perhaps, you know, with the lockdown, we could completely kill it at that point. And that, I think, did not happen. And eventually we had to undo the lockdown or unlock, so to say. And after that, to some degree, I feel that, you know, people themselves have not behaved in the way people in some of the other countries have. I think US is a problem also. I mean, I see here in New York City, as I cross, you know, the Broadway here, on the other side of my 125th Street, lots of people, you know, I would say almost 40% people are not wearing masks. And that is a problem, you know, if you don't wear masks and go out, particularly in crowded places. I see a lot of this on the Indian television happening. Well, then the infections really spread. And yeah. So I think, you know,
which is true. You're absolutely right about the Southeast Asian experience, because Hong Kong, Taiwan, Vietnam donned mask very fast and introduced measures that they had gone through during the SARS and then H1N, you know, MERS and other epidemics. You've been at Niti Aayog, you looked at Rajasthan, so you have a fair understanding of the comorbidity of India's state capacity, if I may say so, the condition of the healthcare sector. How would you, I mean, there's no comparison between Taiwan and Vietnam and India, but I mean, there is Kerala and then there is the rest of India. There is Himachal Pradesh, which has also got a good, decent healthcare system. How do you view the fact that the most developed and the largest states like Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, have had higher incidence and have struggled to control the epidemic? Yeah, I mean, I wanted your perspective from someone who has seen the healthcare capacity as the vice chairman of Niti Aayog from up close.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, it's more, I would say, not because of the 3 years I spent as vice chairman Niti Aayog, but more from a lot of reading that I've done. Also, I visit very frequently India and certainly visit Rajasthan in virtually every one of my visits, at least to Jaipur. My sort of own reading really is that, except for maybe in Tamil Nadu and a couple of states that you have mentioned, Himachal and Kerala, we really don't have serious public health systems. We just don't have it. You know, this goes back to the late 1940s. There was a Bhore committee. I mean, we used to have actually a separate public health, and there was also a public health cadre. But Bhore committee recommended that, you know, the medical and public health sides be merged, which, except for Tamil Nadu, every state did. And what happened in that process was that the medical side, the doctors basically gobbled public health. And so public health cadres also disappeared. So we all know that, you know, particularly Mumbai, you know, there is one heavy rain, and it's also true of my own city, Jaipur. one heavy rain, and because all the drainage systems are clogged and so forth, or they don't exist, water comes to 2 feet, 3 feet high. And that, of course, very quickly becomes the source of the mosquitoes evolving there and spreading the infection, which inevitably sets in.
So the
So
sanitation
we
and
need
health issues, yeah. So sanitation and health issues have always been neglected. And you mentioned Bhore Committee, and I've just my new book, The Gated Republic, looks at public policy failures. And one of the interesting things I found out was the first health survey of India was actually sponsored by Florence Nightingale. And 150 years later, 200, almost 200 years later, I mean, we're still where, whatever that report said on the health and sanitation of India, pretty much a lot of it holds true. But I just want to take you back, get back to the economy issue. You were right saying that the contraction in the India's GDP, it could be, it's a one-time issue and much more severe than other countries, but it's still. But if we look at the pre-COVID economy, 8 quarters of slowdown, the average growth has been sliding over a period. I fear, and many other commentators also fear, that India's potential rate of growth, which we assumed was 8% or at least 7%, has sort of slid to 5%. Would you sort of concur with that, or do you have a different view? You think that India's existing condition has worsened over the years?
So I absolutely disagree
rather
with
differently,
that.
I will put it, do you think India's condition, as your book says India unlimited, it has become India limited? So
I absolutely disagree with both of you. And let me say, first of all, even some of the worst impacted countries actually have almost declined in the fourth quarter. I mean, in this April-June quarter, almost as much as India. I mean, Spain about 22%. Then you got UK maybe 21%. Italy is a little over 17 or 18%. But so once you do the year-on-year calculations for these countries, they too have actually, so just want to modify that. But that's not your main question, I understand. And let me turn to the main question. So yes, the growth, so we can go to pre-COVID growth in 1920 did fall to 4.2%. It will still be revised. I do not, which way will it go? We do not know. But let's take 4.2, and to me, that is the result of one key mistake that the government made. After coming to Niti Aayog, I again internally actually pitched for it and all, but sadly, Department of Financial Services had no understanding. And the then governor of RBI also was playing along largely, he addressed the symptoms. So I think he did the right things in terms of, making the hidden NPAs to become explicit. But then he did not take the actions that were required at the time. I mean, I think action did not actually start till early 2017. When the credit growth completely collapsed. I mean, if you look at the credit, particularly the public sector banks, private sector banks were still doing credit growth at about double-digit levels at the time, but public sector complete collapse. And that is when then the urgency was felt, and then I think that the orders got issued from the very top. The BRA, the Banking Regulation Act, was modified through an ordinance. RBI was empowered, and then by that time Urjit Patel had become governor, who was very keen actually to address the problem, and he moved pretty quickly actually himself. So I think we finally paid for that and that eventually spilled over into NBFC crisis also. The non-bank finance companies also got into trouble there, and that weakness remains. And so we went into COVID actually with significant weakness in the economy, and that still will have to be addressed. So, once we come out of COVID. Right now we are saying that, okay, NPAs will not be, no NPAs to be recognized till September and so forth. But eventually, I think eventually this will have to be faced. So we will still,
Doctor,
in terms of recovery.
I'll interrupt you here because you
Yes, please.
said you admitted there. And the question is, whom are you trying to blame now? In the question in 2000.
I don't blame anybody. I don't blame anybody. I'm just pointing out my job is analyst.
My question is not just complete because 2013 you notice it, 2014 you flagged it, and you are blaming the financial services department and the government that time because they did not take precautionary measure. It's suggested by EE62. Financial services means there must be political leadership also in the ministry at that point in time. There was the prime minister also, there was everybody else there. To me, everybody did conspired or did not cooperate with each other. I don't want to get into this. But as a Niti Aayog person, you must be aware of ultimately what were the compulsions of the finance ministry leadership as well as the RBI governor, but they were friends, they were appointed by the same person. So what was the problem there?
Seems to me you want to blame somebody.
No, I don't want to blame.
Quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. So I'm not looking for.
Because you said financial services, and then you named governor because you blamed the governor already.
Yeah. Okay. I mean,
so
those are the two. To me,
you're putting everything on the door of the governor, not on the ministry there.
Yeah. To me, I look at the professionals, who are responsible, who should understand better. And on this problem, by the way, there's plenty of, I think, on that, if you look up Urjit Patel's book, he'll tell you, that there's plenty of blame to go around, and you can choose your own targets. I sort of mentioned where I saw the bottlenecks. I mean, those are the two places where I felt the bottlenecks while there.
Professor, you mentioned credit, the collapse of credit. Do you think that, I mean, and you also specified that it was around January 2017 that it became worse. And
well, somewhere early. I don't mean January necessarily, but somewhere early.
Visible there. There's also a lot of literature around what demonetization and the introduction of GST. I mean, demonetization sort of wrenched away the availability of informal credit to a lot of small and medium enterprises. So do you think the coming together of all these events is a factor? Do you think that, or they are all separate causes?
No, I have written this actually. I see nothing in the numbers which connects the growth rates to the demonetization. Mm-hmm. That year actually ended with 8.3% growth. Mm-hmm. November 16 is when this happened, and 16-17 growth rate ended up 8.3%. Following year was 7.1%. Where I would look for the impact of demonetization is in prices, because what demonetization is doing is it's bringing all the transactions to a halt. That somehow you got no cash, and your transactions have to be done with cash. So, the supply is almost given at that point in time. So I should see a major collapse in prices. And I've looked at the prices everywhere, meaning because price data are available in a localized way also. They collect price data in a few hundred places. So you can see there is no collapse in prices. So people kept transacting. I mean, I know in Delhi, I was in Delhi, and people found various ways to transact. You just give them either, milkman gave a check, or you give them 2,000 rupees.
And people found ways around it.
Yeah, I mean, 2,000 rupee note has appeared pretty quickly. I mean, that had been, within 3 months. Now, the current chief economist of the IMF has Geeta Gopinath. She was a serious critic of demonetization. And now she did the numbers, and she herself says her own analysis shows that the whole thing dissipated by March of 2017. So demonetization to me is not, I mean, in terms of the policy mistakes, if you want, I would say the delay in dealing with the in the financial, meaning largely NPAs, that was one big one. And the other is later on, which we can come to, which I've written on as well, about, the reversal of the openness to trade, return to import substitution. Yeah. I think that to me is a major policy
Actually,
shift.
I was planning to come to the concept.
So we can come to those.
Yeah,
we can come to
Atmanirbhar.
But I hope you also come to a lot of the very good reforms that the government has done. And I wrote, even in today's Economic Times, I wrote that, look, the long term, I think will return to 7% plus. And we can get to 9 to 10, but on that cannot happen without the economy embracing the global markets. I think that we have to do.
Yeah.
Professor, one thing, like Shankar, one thing I want to add, because what are you saying is also correct. But I would like to know from you, assess how much energy prices contributed to the stability of the economic system in India, because under $10 or $80 to $30 or whatever, and your import deficit has gone down. How much that contributed to the stability?
In what way? I mean,
if petroleum prices were
when the
14.
But see, those prices have fallen largely during the period when all the other things bad things are also happening. I mean, the shock from the financial markets is culminating in that, and likewise the COVID then came on the heels of it. Anyway, right now, the big decline in energy prices that happened, some benefit has happened, but not a large one, because that is the period during which transportation sector was at a stop. And therefore,
prices started with contracting in 2015, not in COVID in 2000.
Well, I mean, not to the level that we have seen during COVID, right? I mean, and they also went up, though. I mean, it's not like this was a one-time fall. So look, if I get bad luck, I also get some good luck. so you can, you can't go into the things that were your good luck, and therefore,
If I get for good work, I must get the name for bad work also.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. No, that's fair. So, but we are discussing the bad part of it. That is precisely what we are.
No, Shankar is asking you again and again. The question NPA, for example, that's a good point you have made. The question is, for both Shankar and I have been from India today, we have been discussing this supply side economics which you have been following from the last 25 years, 91, 20 years almost, 29 years. Don't you think that is now could be one of the contributors that you created excessive supply of everything without looking at the demand creation to that level, the way supply was doing? Even today, when the economy is down, the stocks are going up. There is some mismatch somewhere.
Yeah, no, I mean, first of all, I don't see this as a supply side economics at all. This is not a supply side. This is market economics. Which is what we have progressively embraced, except very, very slowly. We have done it very, very gradually. And demand, look, I sort of simply don't buy the demand side story. Even when people were saying about auto industry that because of demand had collapsed and therefore the auto industry was having this serious problem and all, my take always was that, look, if you're bloody competitive, go and sell to the global market. There is a 17 to 18 trillion dollar worth of global market in merchandise exports, and another $7 trillion market in services exports. So when you say that I have a demand problem, I basically see you saying that I'm not competitive. Become competitive.
What I call supply economics, you call it market economics. Basically, we have different nuances are different.
Yeah, I mean, the supply side, at least in the US, was used in a very different kind of context. I mean, this was with Ronald Reagan was president in the 1980s and all. So it's a different context. I mean, it was used in the context of a market economy. I mean, the US was a market economy at the time. He was using it more in the sense of, that you reduce the tax rates and the tax revenues would actually rise. So that's what that was the context.
Professor, coming what the Americans call to cut to the chase, or to come to this point, there's a lot of debate that the US had a robust stimulus package, that Europe has put together a 900 million euro package. And India has done something, but not many people seem to, I mean, the feel good factor, the need factor and definitely the political rhetoric factor doesn't seem to match. Do you think India's response to reset the economy, to sort of revive the economy, has been adequate?
So here I've consistently maintained that what India did was exactly the right thing for the Indian conditions. First of all, let me do some numbers here, that even with the very limited fiscal response, right? I mean, there was a larger response on the credit side. But on the fiscal side itself, I mean, in terms of transfers, basically, in the US, transfers were incredibly large. And our transfers were very, very small, limited to providing food for about 75% of rural and 50% of urban population under the Food Security Act. And some small transfers were made, but so that was relatively small. And I have said that was the right thing to do for the following reason. Our lockdown was very strict.
Yes.
Supply curve, if I may use just a little bit of jargon here, supply curve was vertical, or close to very vertical. You raise demand, you can't raise supply. Because if the hands are not there on the ground to work, you're not going to get supply response. So that would have gone empty. If you just allow me half more minute more. Now, even with that limited action, we are looking at about the fiscal the debt to GDP ratio rising from about 72% at the end of the last fiscal 1920 to about 85%. Now, and we are not done yet. We are not done yet, because now once the supply begins to happen, we have unlocked and so forth, it may still turn out that demand is deficient. You say, I don't believe in deficiency of demand, but I think politically the government will have to respond. I mean, politically government will have to respond. And so at that point, I think at least then if the government goes in with some transfer stimulus, etc., it might generate some response. And so they will need to do that. But in addition, just allow a few more months. You will see the NPAs piling up at the banks. And there will have to be a very large recapitalization. So where is all that going to come from?
You mentioned about 78% deficit figure. What is the figure for USA and Japan?
No, it's not comparable. US can print money.
I'm just asking you.
US can print money. I don't know that. I know that it's a much larger number, over 100%.
180% and more than
that. But if
well, how is it different? I just want to know how it is different.
No, I don't know. So you can look up. These numbers are available easily. You can look up at Google.
Hey, if the numbers are higher, what is the difference?
It's higher. No, I told you that they are higher. They are higher. I'm aware of that. I'm aware of that.
Situations are different. As a reader, and I want to know that what kind of situations.
No, I'm telling you, as a professor also, I don't remember these numbers. I mean, these days they are easily checkable on Google, so you can check. What I know, I mean, I keep a sense of where roughly they are, and I know that US debt to GDP ratio is larger than 100%. But I don't know what's the relevance of that. Why are you asking me in the present context? I mean, if you're just curious,
justifying 78% is higher, then it is not acceptable.
No, 85 you'll go to 85.
Because in India, all the economists and market wallahs are always insisting on deficit should be reduced to this.
No. You need to understand sir, you need to understand the implication. Why that is important? Because down the road, the interest will have to be paid. Instead of paying on, more like 65-70% debt to GDP ratio kind of debt, you will be paying interest on 90-95%. Well, that will take up, then you will scream that the government is not expanding demand. How will the government expand demand if the 7-8% of the of GDP goes in interest payments by the government? What budget will it have left? Nothing. I'm looking forward ahead. I mean, you can postpone the tax, you can tax the future generations. If that is your preference, you can do it. I have no problem with that. But I won't. I won't.
When you can write off 7 lakh crore worth of bad debts in 2-3 years, 4 years, That is a big demand. You can give concession to corporate sector.
How do you write off?
25 lakh crore. That doesn't make any difference than giving to the poor.
Wait. Who is writing off the debts?
125 lakh concession you gave, now in the party. 1,25,000 crore even in terms of concession you gave to the government, no?
Which
To the
concessions?
corporate sector.
I don't know which concessions you
Shankar, you talked, just explain to him.
Sorry?
You explained that 1,25,000 crore package, first package which was announced.
Oh, you're talking the US?
Now about India.
India, yeah. That was a transfer.
Huh.
No,
That was meant for corporate sector, no, basically.
How was that for corporate sector? This was Food Security Act and the PM Kisan.
No, I think we will get on this in terms.
You're referring to the you're referring to
Shankar.
you're referring to the loans? You're referring to the loans?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. Prabhu is mentioning two things, Professor. One is the write-off of many loans, which is a bank entry, balance sheet entry. The second more important question that he has always been raising for many years is the revenue foregone, which is the exemptions under the tax regime that is in direct and indirect tax that is given to corporate. He thinks that that is something that needs to be looked at. And even though a reform in the direct tax code has been promised, but that has not yet happened. So his calculation is that over, say, in the last 5 or 6 years, at the rate of, say, maybe 1 lakh crore of exemptions given to corporates, the loss of revenue to the government would be about 7 lakh crores. And his grouse, and a lot of people, I would say.
And this item, for example, Shankar, vanished from the paper, the budget papers also now.
So earlier, the government at least used to publish the figures of revenue foregone. I don't think they publish it anymore. That's a point that he's making. But Professor, let me sort of present two alternates to what you said. I agree with you that the debt to GDP ratio is critical. US can print money. Japan has existing headroom, prosperity to deal with higher debt to GDP ratios. But a theoretical question on, there is an Oliver Blanchard paper which Ben Bernanke has quoted saying that as long as the growth rate is higher than the nominal rate, as long as the growth rate is higher and you're able to pay, you can borrow.
Little louder, Shankar, little louder.
Yeah, there's also some disturbance.
Okay, let me repeat 2 points. One is on the issue, the theoretical construct of debt to GDP ratio. There's an Oliver Blanchard paper which Ben Bernanke refers to, which sort of differs with the traditional view. The second point is, Professor Panagariya, is that you will have to find the money. I mean, the question of the not spending the specter of not spending seems to be worse. So in your time, you had advocated disinvestment, expenditure management, and stuff like that. So shouldn't that also be a focus? I'm not talking of austerity. Surely they should raise resources to spend.
That I completely agree with. Actually, on both there is a lot of assets that can be monetized, and of course, a huge amount of public sector enterprises that need to be privatized. This was my mission, but at the end of the day, it still has not happened. We had from Niti Aayog done our job, pushed as hard as we could, and the cabinet had given approval also, but it didn't happen.
One enduring mystery, Professor Panagariya, and probably because you were an invitee to the cabinet and some of us, why was Dr. Jalan's Expenditure Management Commission report never implemented? Or did you, it doesn't feel like it was implemented.
Well, we are certainly, actually, part of it had come to the Niti Aayog, and my understanding is at the time I left, it was in the process of being implemented. A lot of, because Niti Aayog was drawing up the list of the lot of the entities that should be closed down. Now, the report was still not done when I left, so I do not know what transpired afterwards. But that work was being very actively done. And I saw full seriousness, and the Prime Minister had actually asked us to do it. And certainly, you know, I was very keen to go ahead and do it because I thought that the recommendations of the Jalan Committee were all very sensible recommendations. And there are far too many agencies there which really are using up resources but not delivering almost anything in terms of the public service. But I don't know afterwards. So I do not know.
In terms of the impulses for growth, for instance, the number of clearances that government investors have to take in India, the number of compliance issues that have been consistently flagged, even though India has sort of improved on the ease of doing business ratings, but on the ground level, there are issues. One prickly issue that a lot of people raise is labor reforms, rigidity in labor. Now, I think there is an opportunity here for India to sort of leapfrog from, you know, because the world is changing, gig economy, people want work weekly contracts, monthly contracts and all. What is your view on what is the biggest hurdle as India comes out of the unlockdown or lockdown? What would be the one thing that it should immediately address?
Well, see, I mean, in policy, I don't think in those terms, because the governments can address a number of things at once, you know, if they want to. But I think, you know, nevertheless, to try and answer to your specific question, first thing, we lost your voice.
How can I hear you?
Let's see it as an Olympic podium, like the top three policy.
So I'll first say, you know, we will need to to deal with the stress in the financial markets. I think that will have to be, as we come out of COVID, that will have to be priority number one, deal with the stress in financial markets, because that finance is like water, you know, it can seep in anywhere, everywhere, and so forth. So you really have to have good plumbing and so forth. So that I think is the critical thing that the government will need to do. But you know, in the meantime, the government actually has been doing a lot of the reforms, you know, because that Atmanirbhar Bharat package was not all about only the credit. It was also a lot about many reforms that were spelled out. And likewise, you know, for example, I would say you touched on this privatization to raise revenues. Seems to me that, you know, there was a promise there of bringing in a policy on public enterprises. Now, I think that policy, if rightly written, could actually make big, huge difference. You know, I mean, if a lot of the not even performing, why only non-performing? A lot of the enterprises are listed, so we know what their values are and so forth. And even if you sell 5 to 8% of the shares, the government stake goes below 50%, you can then hand it over to a private board and so forth. So, you know, a lot of this can be even huge efficiency gains to be had. I mean, you know, the enterprises that Arun Shuri had privatized, there are studies now of those enterprises, and they have done all uniformly extremely well after privatization.
Here, I mean, there is this sense. I mean, there is economic nationalism. I mean, you know, everything in the US starts with national security before they talk about utter the word trade. But Atmanirbhar Bharat also sort of carries a scent of import substitution era policies. As somebody who has written extensively on this, do you worry about it?
See, Atmanirbhar Bharat came a little later, and purely out of Atmanirbhar Bharat, I haven't seen big actions that I see as the problem ones. But the problem ones began happening well before that. You know, a lot of the tariffs got raised starting somewhere, you know, maybe even 2018, 19, and now we are in 20. Almost 3 years, in the budgets, if you look up, many tariffs have been raised. Lot of talk from the officials and even the Commerce Ministry of import substitution. Suddenly, you know, you also see some of the license permit Raj era terminology returning, this, we used to call this,
Yes.
what was it? The PMP, I forget the full form of this. Mr. Prabhu will probably remember, we used to do this where progressively we are going to kind of, indigenize the product and so forth. So that PMP has returned. Then actual user condition was also used very recently in some press conference or somewhere in some statement by a Commerce Ministry official. No, goodness, I mean, these were archaic terms,
SKDs and whatnot.
SKD I have not seen. Yeah, SKD I have not seen. But
semi-knockdown, semi-knockdown.
Yeah. So now, I think if we go that route, that is a problem. You see, no country, if you look at the ones that have really grown at 8 to 10% on a sustained basis for 2 to 3 decades, no country has done that without capturing the global markets, without really, being, take any country, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, China, and our own. I mean, look, if you look at the very fast growth period from 2003-4 to about 2011-12, 9 years, 8% plus growth. Look at what happened to exports during that period and imports both. So we think that, the irony, the sort of sad part of it is that we think that, look, all these goods we are importing, and if we were to stop these imports, we can manufacture those and we can add to our GDP. It looks very intuitive, very plausible. What we don't realize is that, you produce more of the import competing goods, you'll produce less of the exportable goods. That imports and exports don't move together.
Some trend which we are noticing, which you must have also noticed as economists, this reverse nationalism, economic nationalism, that every country is becoming protectionist, even the countries which you are now teaching. Everybody is now preferring to have some kind of a tariff mechanism which discourages imports from other countries. Even Mr. Trump talks about some concession on motorcycles that he wants to talk about. So don't you think this growing nationalism, economic nationalism, whether it's Europe, whether it's America, whether it's India, so it is going to have a de-globalization of the economy?
I don't believe that for a minute. Now, go back to the 60s. That was the time everybody believed in import substitution. But who succeeded? It's the fellows who said, hell with it, this is wrong policy. All economists were saying, what do we talk of the policymakers? I mean, every economist was for import substitution in India. In India, of course, they are still for it. But say Bhagwati Srinivasan and Desai, you name one economist even outside at that time. Later, Ian Little, you can look up, actually, he wrote very approvingly in 1960 of India's third plan going via import substitution. He says that this is the right thing to do. Markets are there and there is no uncertainty, etc. So they are doing the right thing. By 1970, he had learned from Korean experience, and also he became an incredible, one of the leading advocates of free trade, certainly more liberal trade policies. In those days, free trade, nobody would sort of talk about. They talk about more liberal trade policies. So the countries that have succeeded are the ones who chose not to, go with the rhetoric of the day, but saw what was the right thing to do.
I'm asking, is the current trend, which you must have noticed, is current trend.
No, look, so you're right. So you say the market will somehow close or something. Look, 18 plus 7, $25 trillion is your total export market. 25 trillion, let it shrink to 20. When China started in 2000, if you go, that market is about 6 trillion. So China could have said back, the 6 trillion is too little, we can't do much with it. But they went in and got the markets opened yet further, joined the WTO and got their rights to trade and so forth, full non-discrimination in the policies of all the countries and against them and all. So, you have to be bold, you have to be willing to say that I'll take on to the world markets. You're probably, like every Indian, I'm sure your favorite sport is cricket also. You tell me, if you said कि यार अभी नहीं थोड़ा सा import substitution कर लेते हैं, meaning घर में जरा सीख लेते हैं, so let's not play any international cricket for 10 years. I mean, do you think you will get Tendulkar, Virat Kohli, Yuvraj, Dhoni? I mean, player after player of world-class level. I mean, it's when you go on and work against the best in the world and say, I'm going to challenge you. That is what makes the real world-class player out of you, whether it is cricket or it is exporting automobiles. I mean, if you have protected our automobile industry for 70 years, today still 100% plus tariffs on automobile imports. What is its share? What is its share in the global market? Less than 1% share in the export market.
That's right. But are you suggesting indirectly that whatever we're doing to China is against the basic economic model?
Oh, no. China is a different story here. China, I've written actually, you know, that China has really shown that you can't really trust them, even on the economic side. So I was, you know, if you look up till 3 or 4 post pre-Galwan, I was very much advocating the RCEP, that India should join RCEP, and if the deal was not good, that is fine. I think we should cut the best deal possible. So I was not against the government having actually not signed it off in the last round of negotiations, but I was for India eventually cutting a better deal and signing it. After Galwan, I changed my mind. I think, you know, you cannot trust them, and you cannot trust them on economy either. I mean, tomorrow now, if you get very heavily integrated with China, the shots will be called by the PLA and by the Communist Party, and they would use to whatever, you know, any economic clout they acquire over us as a part of this integration into the Chinese economy, they could tomorrow use against us. So I believe in distancing ourselves from China, which is why I then argue that try to distance ourselves by opening ourselves to European markets, UK market, Canada, Australia, and eventually to the US also, because this is the free trade agreements, you know, I mean,
FTAs.
Geopolitics.
Yeah.
So geopolitically, you know, we should, go ahead.
Yeah. Doctor, I'm trying to understand, this is strategic consideration now, tactics by various countries will now influence economics.
No, of course. I'm not disagreeing with that. I totally agree with that. And which is why I changed my mind. My economics, the economics still is there, but even economics to some degree changes, because if I expect that tomorrow China will use this against me, my integration into the Chinese economy, then even the economic calculation changes.
Let's talk about elections. Shankar, since he's there, what do you think about Trump's chances in
No, I don't comment on any politics either in India or in the United States.
Without outcome of don't comment on the outcome, but will it, whatever outcome is there, will it affect Indian economic relations?
Yeah. No, I mean, I as a
matter of
principle,
I'm not asking you.
No, as a matter of principle, I just don't comment publicly on these things, on politics in either country. I just, I mean, you know, off the camera, if you want to have a conversation, we can have one.
But talking about future, you made some statement in the beginning that future going forward, there is a question about reviving or looking at financial markets and financial.
Yeah. No, look, from that perspective.
Can you explore a little bit? That is one of
the. No. From the economic perspective, why I think, you know, we should feel quite confident in integrating with the United States. When I hesitated with the US, what I had in mind was a free trade agreement. And a free trade agreement for us with the United States today is going to be very, very difficult, because US is super competitive in agriculture. We are just not willing to take the risk in agriculture. So, you know, but if we are willing to take the risk in agriculture, by all means, we should. You know, there is another problem there also, because the US FTA, free trade agreement template, also includes very high standards of intellectual property, labor standards, environmental standards, and all. So all those will kick in, and I'm not sure we are ready for that. So that was my reservation. But I mean, there's not reservation, but there's my reason that why we'll not be able to do that with the United States right away. Those hurdles are far less with the European Union. Agriculture is not a big competitive sector in the European Union. In fact, we will win out in agriculture when it comes to the European Union. So
you're talking about revival of local Indian financial sector, financial things. You said one of the concerns, your concerns were to revive the financial system in
No,
India.
I thought we had switched now to something else. The conversation. We can come back to
I
that.
kept quiet. I said I'll ask you.
So, but I'm coming
that is
to
one of the things I'm asking. What do you think should be done now? That is
yeah,
part.
no. So I'm coming to your specific question with on the US. Why there I feel that we can be confident that whichever party comes to power in the White House, one thing is not going to change, which is in US relations with India, whether it's Donald Trump or it is Joe Biden. That much I am confident that this relationship will continue to improve. Both sides see. I mean, look, what Donald Trump did to China is not something that only Donald Trump felt. If you look at the reports of the USTR to the Congress, which goes every year, you can go back to Bush days, you can go back to Obama days. These were the complaints being made. Only difference was that Donald Trump said, hell with you, enough is enough, I'm going to act. And he acted. Whereas the Democrats were making the exact same complaints, but not actually acting on it. So he showed the guts and he acted on it. But they realized that whatever Trump has done, even if Democrats come to the White House with respect to China, not much is going to change. And likewise, symmetrically, what is happening with respect to India in terms of the rising relationship with the US, that's not going to change. And so I feel fully confident actually that we need not be so defensive in our relationship with the United States, particularly on these trade issues and so forth. We should resolve them quickly and go for it. I mean, liberalization of your own is for your own good also. So why are we so hesitant on that one? I mean, it's not disarmament. Disarmament is different. I mean, in trade, your own liberalization is good for you. Disarmament is not good for you.
Do you tell us for recharging Indian economy, what do you think 1, 2, 3, 4 steps should be taken immediately, short term, long term?
Yeah, the first thing that has to happen is to bring COVID under control, because without it, the workers will not fully return. I mean, even though we have restored that there is no restriction officially on the movement of people, people are afraid. I mean, I have no restrictions in New York to go out, but I'm not going out unless I absolutely have to go. So, and it is costly also to go out because you have to have your tests done and so forth. So first, I mean, without that, we are not going to get to full capacity. My own prediction still is that in spite of the problems we have discussed, as this comes into control, I think the return to the normal will happen, but normal has to be pushed up. So I would first of all, I would open up to trade, not only reverse the liberalization that, not only reverse the protection that I've imposed in the last 3 years, but go further. We got to go down to about 7% tariffs maximally. I mean, I'm a free trade, so if you go free trade, that's fine. Politically, that's probably not something that's going to happen, but we should go down to about 7%. Liberalize also the auto industry, etc. I would make a deal with the European Union. I think that would be one way to open up. That's politically that makes it more feasible. So anyway, trade liberalization, that will be one very important one. Labor law reforms. Now that can be done right now, by the way, because all the 3 codes on labor, one has already, wage one was already done. That's been voted on in the parliament already, but the remaining 3 are going now. One can do a lot of good labor law reform. I don't think it's quite happening. Some bits of changes for the better are happening, but not enough. So labor, I think is, in a way, labor and land, these 2 reforms are very critical, both, because in India, land is also extremely expensive. Plus it is extremely difficult to put together for the private entrepreneurs, even 100 acres of land together, because so much because the absence of land titles, you have so much of this, encumbrances, because you assemble 100 acres and there are probably 150 different pieces of land you have to acquire, you have to purchase, and inevitably some pieces have encumbrances, and so you don't know from whom to buy. So that is a big problem. It needs to be solved. So together those, and the third one will be the financial sector, of course. I think financial sector reforms are very critical, within which I would go and privatize most of the public sector banks. If the government is hesitant, keep the State Bank of India. It's a bank that is well run. The government is running it well. It's also the largest bank. and that I think should suffice to do the social goals. But of course, if there are social goals, private banks should chip in also. I mean, they do like priority sector lending that applies to the private banks as much as it applies to the public sector banks.
Doctor, you are very specific. You are saying international tariffs should be reduced. That's one. Labor law reform should be
Labor
done.
and land,
They should be done. Third, you made this about land reform should be done and ownership record. You're not saying land should be acquired by government and given to the private sector. That is not what you meant.
To me, I'm interested in the outcome. I'm interested in the outcomes that the land ought to be available to the private entrepreneurs.
It's a market force. You are applying market forces everywhere else except land. I don't know. Let the market pay for this.
Look, that's because you don't have the markets operating there. Because if my titles are not there, then all kinds of encumbrances exist already. So the government is already disadvantaged the market fully. You understand?
Shankar has got a phrase for that. You are the privatization of profit and socialization of losses. That means you buy land. He has created a phrase that in India the practice is all economists, free market economists, always say privatization of profit and socialization of losses. It means land should be bought cheaply from the people.
Whose recommendation is that?
This is Shankar's phrase.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of skeptics around, but I strictly actually say absolutely not. Don't bail out anybody. Why should you bail out?
You should punish the land.
But you should punish. No. Look, one can be a cynic and all. What you're referring probably is to the NPAs that got created and that led to, but those fellows who really did this should be punished. Should be punished for their crimes.
I think
you can't punish if NPAs if you let them completely go off and leave the banks. Look, on the private banks, by the way, come back to Mr. Prabhu, not a rupee has been spent actually on the NPAs in private banks. Not a rupee. All recapitalization has been done to public sector banks. So tell me, what do you have to say?
Because they're liberal in giving money to the on phone, phone banking.
What? Well, so now you're explaining to me. Now you're explaining to me. But that is so this privatization of profits and socialization of losses is happening in your public sector.
We have completely run out of time, Professor. I take all the 3 steps that you suggest are very valid. Probably we can leave that for another day, but
another day.
Thank you very much for your time. It has been a very robust and very engaging discussion with you.